Okay, thank you everyone for coming back for the second part of our little mini series here. Now, often mini series will mean that the two are very connected and they're on the same topic. We're talking about Purim, but there'll be some other minor connections from last week. But for the most part and really overall, this is going to be a new topic and another idea that really comes from Purim, and an idea that I think is integral to Purim and that really catapults us into the rest of the year. So for lack of better words, tonight, really I want to track a trail, right? You know, dogs have a very keen sense of smell, so they can find a trail. And so I really want to be able to follow a certain trail that we see from the beginning of time until the story of Purim, and that's very applicable to our daily lives. And also, just as a general introduction, you know, there are often times that we'll see gematrias or we'll see different hints that the rabbis give us that seem, okay, well, anyone can make up a gematria, anyone can make up a hint like this. But someone once explained it to me with a little bit of a parable. And imagine you see two twins come into shul and they're wearing the same exact clothes. So no one would turn to his friend and say, hey, wow, it's crazy. You've got two random kids who their mothers dressed them up similar and they randomly came to shul and they're standing next to each other, right? You wouldn't say that. You would say, hey, I see twins. I see they're dressed the same. Their mother must have dressed them the same. There must have been intention. There must have been a goal here. So often in the Nimshal, really what comes out of this is often when we see similarities or we see hints to different things in the Torah, different things that the rabbis present to us. So it shows that there's a common theme that they saw in the Torah. There's a common theme that Hashem is trying to get at. And so that's where a lot of times you'll get gematrias or ramazim or hints to. And so Amir Hashem, we'll follow some of these hints, some of these little behind the scenes down the road. Okay, so in general, the name of the shir being the fragrance of Purim. In general, the idea of smell, the idea of fragrance, being able to smell something with our nose, has a lot to do with Adar. We'll see later, but the Bnei Yisraschar says that the month of Adar has to do with the nose. What exactly does that mean? We'll see. But there are a lot of things that have to do with smelling. If you just look at the first source, the Gemara Chulin tells us, Haman mina Torah minayin. Now, Haman, where do I find a hint to him in the Torah? And the Gemara says we find Haman hinted to in the Torah from Hamin Ha'etz. There's a word that we'll get to. There's a phrase that we're going to see in the story in the beginning of creation. We're going to see that over there that they ate from the tree, and Hamin Ha'etz. So the Gemara explains that Haman, you can see in that word, Hamin can also be read as Haman. And the Gemara continues, says, Esther mina Torah minayin. Where do I know of Esther from the Torah? Where do I find Esther hinted to? And the Gemara says, Va'anochi haster astir, I'm going to hide my face. And so that's where the name of Esther is hinted to in the Torah. And more importantly for us, Mordechai mina Torah minayin. Where do I find the name Mordechai? Where do I find Mordechai, the hero of the story of Purim? Where do I find him hinted to in the Torah? And the Gemara says, Dechsiv mar duror. From the words mar duror, which was the myrrh, which was a certain one of the bushes or the what's the word, parts of the incense that were used for the Ketores. Umetargaminan, and the Targum translates that to be miradachya. And essentially what the Gemara is saying is the name Mordechai sounds like Marduror or miradachya. And what the Gemara is really trying to tell us is these names are hinted to in the Torah. And so there must be something where they're being hinted in the Torah. There must be something about their names that this can teach us. And there must be something integral to the story if the Gemara is trying to tell us, well, by the way, their names are hinted to in these certain places. The name Mordechai being hinted to by the part of the incense, the part of the Ketores called the Marjuror. So in source 2, there were 11 ingredients in the Ketores, which was the incense that was offered up in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Kodesh HaKdashim, also specifically on Yom Kippur. And there were 11 ingredients. And one of them, the fifth one, as we see in source 2, was more. More is myrrh. The truth is, I don't know what half of those ingredients. I can translate them to English, but that doesn't mean I know what they mean in English. But mor is myrrh, and that hints to Mordechai. And there are some other ingredients here that hint to other people. We'll get to. We also know another hint towards the sense of smell. Esther. Esther's name was, in the Gemara Megillah, it says her name was Hadassah. Hadassah comes from the word hadas, from the hadassim that we have as part of our lulav and esrog on Purim, and the hadas smells very nice. And so there was some sense of Esther smelling very nice and Mordechai smelling very nice. So what exactly does this have to do with Purim, with the idea of smell? And what does that actually tell us about Purim? So that's the first question. And the second question, let's just see a very interesting source, the Bnei Yissaschar, in source 3. So he says, Shenafal Hapor al Chodesh Adar, that Haman threw down his lots, and the lot came out when he wanted to kill the Jews during the month of Adar. And the month of Adar, says Bnei Yissaschar, and we'll get to this, is a chotem chush hareach. And the month of Adar has a lot to do with the sense of smell, with a person's ability to smell things. V'zehu she'amar. And this relates to what it says, B'voa lifnei hamelech, that during the Purim story, it says that Esther came before the king. And of course, as we talked about last week, it doesn't just mean the physical king Achashverosh, but Esther came before the king of all kings and Hashem. At that moment when she came before King Achashverosh, in her mind, she was presenting herself before her physical king, but she was also presenting herself before God. And she came before the king, Lifnei Melech Malko Sha'olam, she came before Hashem. And Amar Ima Sefer Yashuv, please undo your decree. Hainu Yisbonenu Hadavar Hanimsa Kasav B'Sefer Torah. But the Bnei Yissaschar says, and again, we'll explain these things at more depth. It says this hints to, she was saying, please look at what's written in the Torah, Hashem. V'nimsa asher pu'ula sachotem amariach b'hadasim asher b'msula kayam la'ad. And she was saying to Hashem, Hashem, please take note of what's written in your Torah and save us. And somehow that related to smell and her name. Kiloi nispagam b'chet adam arishon v'loi nispasa la'asas hanachash. Al kein yashuv machshava haman al rosho. So to translate what he means and what he's trying to say, Bnei Yissaschar is very complicated, but we'll try to take out from a few things of what he's saying to really explicate it. And he says that Esther was going before Hashem and saying, please save us, and remind yourself of the smell, the sense of smell that was never ruined from the beginning of all time. And because of that prayer of please save us, and the sense of smell that's never been ruined should play a role. Because of that, the whole plan of Haman fell apart and it fell onto his head. Okay, I know that sounds very confusing, and it is. Because what is the Bnei Yissaschar trying to describe? He seems to be describing a prayer that Esther gave before Hashem, having to do with smell, having to do with the sense of smell that was never ruined. So what does it mean it was never ruined, right? So two questions. What was this prayer that Esther was giving? And the second question is, what does smell have to do with Purim? So let's go through time. We're going to start from the beginning of all time, the beginning of all sins, and we'll follow that through a few generations until we reach the Purim story. So let's just start with one of the first stories in the Torah, right? Source 4. And we'll read it inside it. The Hanachash Haya Arum. Right, God has created everything, and everyone's sitting there in the garden. Everyone's happy. There's man, there's woman, and all of a sudden comes along the snake. And the snake was very crafty. He was arum. He was crafty. Mikol chayas hasadeh, from all the other animals that Hashem had created. And the snake turned, v'yomer el ha'isha, and he turned to the woman, to Chava, to Adam's wife, and he said, Af ki amar Elokim. Hashem told you, don't eat from all the trees in the garden. Did he really say that? Evatomra ishal nachash. And the woman said to him, yeah, God told us that we can eat from everything, except there's one thing which we're not supposed to eat from. That tree, the Eitz Hadas, that special tree right there in the middle of the garden. And the snake turns to Chava, turns to the woman in verse 4, and he says, really? Don't worry, you're not going to die if you eat it. You'll be okay. Ki yodeya Elokim, because guess what? God knows the minute you eat it, ki b'yom achalta mimenu, the day you eat from that tree in the middle, V'nifkachu einehem, your eyes are going to be open. V'yisem kelokim yodea tov v'ra. Guess what? You're going to be like gods yourselves. You're going to know between good and bad. You're going to be godly. So the snake is tempting Chava. He's tempting the woman, saying, God said you can't eat it? Nah, you'll be okay. God's just trying to keep you away from becoming godly. And V'tera hi'isha ki tova eitz l'maychal. So she saw that the fruit looked good. The chisava suleinayim, and to her eyes, they looked beautiful. And she really, really desired the fruit after this discussion with the snake. The nechmada eitz lahaskil v'tikach miperyo v'tochal. So what did she then do? She took it and she ate it. Right? Just note the verbs being used. She saw, she took, and she ate. So far, if we count, how many senses have been used? A person has 5 senses. So Chava, the woman, used 3 of her senses to sin so far. She used her eyes. She looked at the fruit and it looked good. And v'tikach, and she plucked it from the tree and she felt it. That's her second sense, the feeling. V'tochal, and she ate it. 3 senses. Taste. Okay, 3 down, 2 more to go. V'titen gam l'isha ima. And then she turned to her husband and she said, hey, taste this. So her husband took it and everyone's having a good time. It's a nice fruit party. And the snake's just sitting there laughing. And all of a sudden they realize the mistake they've made. They realize they're naked. This has dawned upon them. Vayishmu, in verse 8, Es kol Hashem Elokim misalech began l'rochayom. And they hear God coming. They hear God walking in. V'yomer mihigid l'cha ki arumata. Hey, how do you guys know that you're naked? God turns to them and says, listen, I know what you did. But he gives us a chance and he says, how do you know you're naked? What's going on? Why are you so embarrassed? Ki hamin ha'etz asher tzivisicha leviltiach mimenu achalta. Hamin ha'etz. Did you eat from the tree? Again, that's the hint towards Haman. Did you eat from the tree? I told you not to. Did you? And so obviously they did, and Hashem gives out the punishments, and the punishments being that childbirth for the woman, and there's going to be death in the world, and man is going to have to work very hard. And in the last line in source 4, what's the punishment for the snake? Hu yashuvcha rosh v'atat shufenu akev. What's going to be is that the generations of men are going to stomp on your head, you snake, and you're going to bite their heel. And then he turned to man and said, you listened, you shouldn't have listened. Okay, so let's take a step outside. We just described a story that all of us know very well. But this story is very interesting because what it describes is 4 out of the 5 senses were used to sin. The snake comes along and tries to tempt us, and we fail. And we use 4 out of our 5 senses when sinning. 1 was she looked at it. 2 was she took it. 3 was she ate it. And 3rd, she listened to the voice of the snake. So 4 out of our 5 senses were used to sin. There's 1 sense that wasn't used to sin. And which sense was that? The sense of smell, the nose. Somehow that escaped attention. Somehow that wasn't used. She didn't take it like a good chef, waft it up to her nose, smell how good it smells. No, she looked at it, she took it, she ate it, and she heard. That's what happened. And by the way, Hamina ate. Well, there are hints to this, but the Nachash tried to trick us to eat from that tree. And what the Gemara earlier was trying to tell us is that Haman is sourced in this tree. Hamin ha'etz, Haman from the tree. Haman himself was very much like the snake, trying to get us to sin, trying to get us to fall, as we talked about last week. The snake and Haman are very similar. And if we can just look at that last punishment also that God gives out to the snake. So he says something very interesting. You snake, yeshuv charosh. Everyone's going to stomp on your head. And what are you going to do? You're going to try to bite at their heel. It's a very interesting choice of words, the akev. You're going to bite at their heel. Akev reminds us of a next generation that we're going to go to, and that'll be Yaakov and Asap, right? Because this fight between the snake and man, and the fight between Haman and Mordechai later on, sandwich another fight, and that is the fight between Yaakov and Asap, because it's a very similar fight. It's a fight that has to do with smell. It's a fight that has to do with control of destiny. See, the snake, his whole goal was to make us realize, hey, you guys can be in control of your own destiny. You can be Kelokim. You can be in charge. And the snake tempts us to say, have your own mind, have your own das, have your own thoughts, have your own control over what happens in this world. You're in charge. That's what the snake tempts us with. And obviously, we have free choice and we can do what we need to do in this world. But ultimately, Hashem is in control. We're not in control of our destiny. And this is a machlokus, is an argument that plays out over generation in the world. The nations turn to us and say, there's no God. There's no one in control but ourselves. And we turn to them and say, no, but Hashem is in control. And it all goes back to that initial back and forth between the snake and man. So it's interesting, by the way, in the Purim story. So we're told in source 5 that when the king, Ahasuerus, made a whole feast for us, for the Jews, so he did it at the end of the verse, Lasos kirtzon ish v'ish. Everyone could have what they wanted. And I was struck by that language. Everyone can have what they want, because the snake was turning to man and saying, you can have what you want. The whole goal, you can do what you want. You can choose between good and bad. You'll be in control of your destiny. So the Maharal comments on that line of at the Purim Suda, at the meal of Ahasuerus, everyone can eat and do what they want. So he says, Yesh lefarish gam kein lasos kiratzon. Let's explain what it means to do as they want. Kolomar, kol echad asher hu mevakesh lasos. It means everyone can do whatever they want. They're in control. Ein ma'akabalav. Nothing will stop you from controlling what you want to control. V'zehu kiratzon ish v'ish. And so when Ahasuerus made this whole party, that everyone can do what they want, that's what was hinted to. That everyone can do what they want, hein tov, hein lara, whether good or for bad. So again, we see a lot of similarities between this, between the fight between us and the other nation, between us and Haman, between us and the snake, of do whatever you want, you're in control. And us, no, but realizing that Hashem is in control. Okay, so let's follow this machlokus, this argument, a few generations down. In source 7, in source 8, now let's follow, let's go to Yaakov and Asap. So Yaakov and Asap are born, and they're polar opposites. And they grow up, and at some point, Yaakov wants to get the birthrights from Asap. And so comes in Asap, famished, hungry from the field, and he sees Yaakov cooking all the lentils, and he turns to him and says, Haliteni na min adom adom hazeh. Feed me that red stuff. And Yaakov says, okay, well, I'll feed it to you if you give me and sell me your birthright. Sell me the Bechorah, sell me the rights to the firstborn blessings. So he does so. Asap gives in. So the Baal Term notes on this, and again, hints. Well, there are so many hints to things, and hints tell us there's a deeper truth. The Baal Term in source 8 says, Haliteni na min. You know what the first letters of those 3 words spell out? Roshei Tevos Haman. They spell out the name Haman. And again, I couldn't make these things up, but it's a Baal Turim. He's already the earlier generations, during the generations of Tosfos, the earlier commentaries on the Gemara. So he can say that. I can't. So he says, Haliteni na min. It hints to Haman. Haman is right there in the room, meaning not Haman physically, but the idea of what Haman represents is right there in the room when you have Asap and Yaakov talking. And the Baal Turim says in source 8, Lomar, Kishem Yaakov kana ma'asa me'Asap b'choraso. The same way Yaakov acquired from Asap the birthright, belechem be'adashim, with bread and lentils, kach kana Mordechai as Haman le'eved b'pas lechem. So too Mordechai somehow acquired Haman. We don't exactly have time for it right now, but what he's hinting to is a Gemara that says that back in the day, Haman and Mordechai used to be buddies. Not buddies, but they worked for the king. And at some point, Haman ran out of money, and he basically sold himself to Mordechai as a slave. And we don't have to get into the details there, but realize that the same back and forth that you have between the snake and man, between Haman and Mordechai, all of a sudden you have between Yaakov and Asap. And so you have Yaakov and Asap stands for someone who's already made, someone who Amalek descends from, who says there's no God in this world. There's no one controlling anything. And of course, Yaakov, the Akav, the heel, who says no, but of course, God's controlling this world. So as I hinted to before, if we go back to the end of the story over there in the garden, so over there, God punishes the snake by saying they'll step on your head and you'll try to bite their Akav, their heel, maybe hinting to Yaakov, hinting to this ongoing argument since the beginning of all time. But it doesn't stop there. So we're still in that generation of Yaakov and Asap. So let's see another very interesting thing. So after he sells the birthright, a little while passes, and finally it's time to capitalize on that birthright, call the stock in. So he goes, because Yitzchak is getting old, and he goes to get the bracha from Yitzchak. And of course, Yaakov has to trick Yitzchak to be able to get the bracha, and he comes in dressed like Esav, and he's wearing Esav's clothes. And the pasuk says in source 9, "V'yigash v'yishak lo v'yarach hasreach begadav v'yivarchechu." And he came over, he kissed him, and he hugged him. And Yitzchak smelled a very nice smell coming off from the clothes. And he said, "Re'eh reach b'ni karech sada asher berchu Hashem." Wow, you smell really good. You smell like the field that God has blessed. So it doesn't really make sense that the clothes themselves smell good, because the clothes themselves probably smelled like goats. And last time I checked, goats don't smell good. So what was Yitzchak smelling? Right? Anyone can disagree, but last time I was in a farm with goats, it's not such a nice smell. So what was he smelling? So the Medrash, and Rashi quotes this, the Medrash in source 10 tells us, and I'll say it outside, it teaches us that he smelled the smell of Gan Eden wafting in. Now, exactly, again, when we talk about all these things, we have to realize not always is it quite physically. Sometimes Chazal are just trying to highlight to us commonalities and connections and the like. It could be literal, but we don't have to take it literal. But to realize that what Yitzchak was smelling was that smell of Gan Eden, and that smell, again, the smell has never been ruined. Yitzchak's eyesight might be going, and Yitzchak's feeling might be going, and he's tricked in this and that. But you know what's not going? Is smell. Because smell goes back to the beginning of all time. It was never ruined. It was never ruined by that original sin. And smell somehow connects to Gan Eden, because when you have that beautiful smell, somehow it's passed through generation. We talked during the time of the first sin, and it wasn't ruined. And all of a sudden, we're standing here with Yaakov and Asap and Yitzchak, and yet again, we see this hint to the smell of Gan Eden. So we'll see. The smell keeps wafting in. We're following a trail, and we'll see where it takes us. So if we thought that this was all random and that there were no further connections, there's another connection to show us that this Yaakov and Asap fight, this discussion between Yaakov and Asap, has what to do with Haman and Mordechai. Because the Gemara, the Medrash further tells us in source 11 that the language used, "Vayivez be'enav lishloach yad b'Mordechai levado," that the Megillah tells us that Haman himself was disgusted to just hurt Mordechai when he wouldn't bow down. He said, "I'm not stopping at Mordechai. I'm going to go for the whole Jewish nation." And the Medrash says that very much sounds like the language of Vayivez be'enav by Asap, that Asap despised. He looked down on the birthright. The similar language, right? You have Asap, who is the great-great-great-grandfather of Haman. It's in the family. It's in the genes to despise this holiness, to despise these good things. The Targum Yonasan, actually, when translating Haman's issue with Mordechai, so he translates in source 12, he says that Haman was really upset because Haman didn't like that Mordechai wasn't bowing down to him, and he said, "I'm not going to stop at Mordechai. I'm going to kill all the Jews." And besides, it says that he remembered, you know what? His father, meaning Mordechai's great-great-great-great-grandfather, was Yaakov, and he tricked my father being my great-great-great-grandfather Asap. So we see this, again, the snake and man following down to Asap and Yaakov, going all the way to Haman and Mordechai. So we see these connections just traveling generations, this fight between the two, and the good smell somehow in the background. And again, smell signifies something that was never ruined, something that was never tainted. We say that when talking about Mordechai, so we said Mordechai stands for Mar Dror, the good smelling spice that was used in the Ketores, the Shemen HaMishcha, the myrrh. So what was the Mor Dachia? What was this Mar Dror, this good smell? The Ramban tells us that the smell was blood from a wild tzvi, a wild deer. And it was an animal that was free, and that blood was used. It was taken to be able to use for the incense. And somehow it gave off a very beautiful smell. And the language the Ramban uses is so interesting because he says at the end of source 13, it was naki min haziaf shemezayfen oso tamid. It was free from all the gross things that might, all the things that might make it impure. Something about that smell that we're saying signifies Mordechai's name is very pure. It's unadulterated. It hasn't been affected by gross things. And again, talking about that smell that remains unaffected from the beginning of all time, that very spiritual sense that remains free of sin. It's kind of cool because chelbana was another spice that was used in the Ketores. Chelbana was the one bad smelling spice. There were 11 spices, 10 of them smelled great. There was one more, and that made 11, and that was the chelbana. Chelbana smelled bad, but somehow when mixed with everything else, it made it a beautiful, beautiful smell, the whole thing. So again, what's the gematria of chelbana? Chelbana is the gematria of Haman. Haman, bad smell. Haman, a person who was against this whole spiritual world. Haman, who was against God running the world, who says there's no one running the world. Haman is that bad smell somehow in the mix. But all the good smells come along and totally nullify it. Jokes on Haman because Haman smells bad, and he says if you smell bad, you stay bad, and once you're down, as we talked about. But you know what actually eventually happened to Haman? So Haman smells bad. Fine. Interesting. I never thought about it. He smells really bad because at some point his wife even dumps all the garbage onto him, right? When he's being led there, when he's leading Mordechai through the streets. So his wife thinks that he's Mordechai because he's the one leading the horse. So she dumps the chamber pot on his head. I didn't even think about it till now. But Haman smells pretty bad. What happens to his great-great-grandchildren? We're told in we talk about in the Seder night, in the Haggadah, they learned in Bnei Brak. So we see even from Haman, even from that bad smell, if you mix it with really good things, a nice smell, something beautiful can come out. So what we see, again, we see this machlokas, we see this argument between who's in control and can a good smell really stay good throughout the generations. If a person smells bad, does it remain bad? Or does smell have a way of rising above all the filth and smelling good still? So it was very interesting to see in source 14, the Medrash Rabbah says that there were four people, shepaschu ba'af v'nevdu ba'af. There were four people that opened up ba'af with the word af even, and they were lost with that. And obviously, I think what the Medrash means is that there are phrases that were used that signify their coming up in power. And it might be, yes, whoever it was did commit suicide. Was it his daughter who threw the trash? His daughter, thank you, not his wife, not Zeresh. Oh, so his daughter is the one who threw the chamber pot on Haman. Either way, he stank. But what we're saying, okay, so there were four people who started with Af and ended with Af. Af was them up and coming and becoming powerful, and then they somehow fell off the train in the other direction and were lost and ultimately met their demise. And two of the things that the Medrash writes are the Nachash and Haman. The snake and Haman. They started with Af, their phrases, as we saw in the beginning, in the initial story. They says, Af, did God really say that the trees are usher? And Haman himself says such a phrase. But why was I struck by this? Because the word Af has another meaning. Af can mean the nose. The nose. There were four, and for our case here, there were two individuals, two beings who tried to start with the Af, tried to start with bringing us down and ruining us and making us smell bad in sin and not allowing us to believe that God runs the world. But ultimately, they met their demise, ba'af, right? Because what they don't realize is that no matter how bad someone really, really smells, you can find a good smell. It can come above all of it. We find that by the Ketores. In source 15, we're given the mitzvah of the Mizbeach Mikdar Ketores that we're supposed to offer up the incense. So there's a machlokas of what was the purpose of the incense. Was it to get rid of all the other bad smells? I think the Rambam Mor Nevuchim says that the purpose of the Ketores was to burn it in the mikdash, in the temple. That way, all the other bad smells would go away. It would overpower them. You should know all commentaries do not like that because how could you say the Ketores? The Ketores is a beautiful thing, and it was only there to get rid of a bad smell. No, the Ketores itself was a beautiful smell. The Ketores itself was there for a certain kapara. It was there for a certain atonement. It was there to raise us up. And that was the avoda. That was one of the services on Yom Kippur, one of the highest and holiest services of bringing the Ketores, bringing this incense. See, the pasuk says in source 15, "V'chipar Aaron al karnosav achas b'shana midam chatas hakipurim achas b'shana yichaper alav." It says once a year he's going to bring this, and once a year it's going to gain an atonement for us in the Kodesh Hakdashim, in the Holy of Holies. So I saw a very nice hint that why does it say Achash B'Shana twice? It says once a year he's going to do this, and once a year he's going to, offer the incense. Just say it once a year, don't say it twice, because there are two Yom Kippurs. There's one Yom Kippur where we bring the Ketores, where we bring the actual incense. But there's another, we know, like the Arizal say, and a lot of other hints, that Yom Kippurim, Purim, is the day like Yom Kippur, because there are a lot of similarities. That on Yom Kippur, we're bringing the Ketores, we're bringing that incense, and that's the finest of finest. It's the ultimate service in the Beis HaMikdash. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to give us a kapara, give us an atonement on all those finer things that we haven't gotten an atonement for through all the other sacrifices that we've brought. And so it's brought and raises us up, because no matter how, unrefined a person might be, comes along the Taurus, that good smell, and it helps to bring an atonement on everything else that we've done and bring us up. And Purim is very similar. See, Purim, we're seeing all these hints to smell that come Purim, that we are combating Haman, we're combating Asap, we're combating the Nachash. We're basically saying you smell bad, and there's no God that runs the world. You're in control. But by the way, if we're in control and we make mistakes, and we're in control and things don't go right, so it's kind of a bummer, because there's nothing to pull us up. There's no greater being. There's no Hashem to really raise us up. If I'm in control and mistakes happen, that's on me. So really, it's a horrible way of thinking. See, the Nachash is trying to tell us there's no God in the world and you're in control. But if I'm in control and things don't go well, so that's a really, really unhappy, hard existence. If I don't smell good, if I'm not doing things the way I want to be doing them, if there's a bad smell, a reach ra that's rodef, that's coming, wafting off of me, and I'm doing what I can be doing, but ultimately, if I'm in control and nothing changes, so that's a really sad existence. So comes along Mordechai, comes along Esther, and says, no, but there's a greater smell, which is why their names are hinted to in the Torah as nice smells. And they come along and say, even when a person thinks that they smell bad, even when they think that there are all these bad smells around them, mix it in with everything else, and don't worry, there's still a good smell. There's still something good about you. That's why we say that the smell was never tainted. The Gemara, which maybe we will get to, will not, says that smell is not something that the body itself benefits from, but really the soul benefits from. If you ever thought about how do you wake a person up? With smelling salts, right? It's a shock to the system. It wakes them up. But we also smell we smell besamim, we smell spices after Shabbos, because it's a smell that makes the neshama feel good, the soul. It's a very spiritual sense. And why is it so spiritual? Because it was never affected by the original sin. It was never affected by that snake in the beginning of all time who tried to bring us down. So what's so interesting is now what we've done, if we've spanned generations. On one end, we started with Haman, we started with the snake and man, and all of a sudden we get to the opposite spectrum of Mordechai and Haman, and we see the hints to each of them, because Haman is like the snake, Hamina eats, and Mordechai is that good smell that was never affected from the beginning of time, and that's the ongoing battle. So how does the battle end? How does everything end? So yes, we tripped up in the beginning of all time, and we ate from that tree. But who's hung on the tree in the end? Haman. See, that Nachash tried to trick us with the tree, and tried to get us to sin with the Eitz Hadas, and we failed, and we fell, and that created many problems in this world, which we're trying to still fix today. We're all trying to get back to that first day of Gan Eden. We're trying to connect to Hashem. We're trying to get back to our roots, back in Gan Eden, or we're trying to get to Mashiach. But who falls by the tree this time? It's Haman. And even more so, what's fascinating is not only is he hung on a tree, but Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer teaches us in source 16 that Vitziva Melech Litzlosa ala eitz, that the king said, hang him, right? When finally Esther points at him and says, that's the guy who wants to kill my nation. So Achashverosh jumps up and he says, hang him now. Well, after he went outside and he came back in, but fine. But also Shah Ma'as Eliyahu Zal. So at that moment, what did Eliyahu do? Nidma l'charvona. Eliyahu appeared as Charvona, Echad Misarisei HaMelech, one of the servants of the king, and Amar Lo Adoni HaMelech Yesh H Bebeso Shel Hama Mibeis Kachek Dashem. Said Charvona to Achashverosh, guess what? This guy has. Haman has a tree, has wood from the Beis Hamikdash, from the Holy of Holies, that he was going to use to kill the Jews. Use it to kill him. Where did Haman take his large pole, his 50 amos pole from? Well, Achashverosh sacked the Beis Hamikdash. Achashverosh had all the holy vestitures, all the different vessels from the Beis Hamikdash. It's not such a far stretch to say that, as the Medrash says, Haman took his wood from the Holy of Holies, from the place we offer the Ketores, from the place that we offer the holiest of smells, in the holiest of places. That's where he took the tree, that wood, to hang us from. Harkening back to perhaps the original tree of all time. Again, there's hints. Why a tree from the Kodesh HaKodashim? Why this tree? Why is that what Haman is trying to hang us on? Because it's a hint, because Haman was trying to do just like the Nachash tried to do. Tried to hurt us, tried to get us to realize that we're nothing and that there's no God in control and that we can be in control. And if you're down, you're down. You can't get up, like we said last week. So anyway, so that's where Haman falls. Haman's caught and he's hung on the tree. A tree that was used in the Beis Hamikdash, not only the Beis Hamikdash, but the Holy of Holies, where the Ketores, where that beautiful smell was offered. So he thought he could get us. But ultimately, the one thing that wasn't ruined from the beginning of all time was the sense of smell. And that sense of smell eventually comes down to save us. And that place where we offered the incense, and that place, the holiest of places, that's really where Haman meets his demise. So what does this practically mean for us? What's the take-home message? Besides for, you just see a certain beauty in Torah and Chazal, that there are hints all over, just trying to show us throughout generations there are connections and there are different things that Hashem wants us to realize are flying in different the same arguments, the same issues that happen generation over generation that we ourselves are trying to combat. Well, what's the take-home message? So I think it's twofold. One is that the Gemara tells us, the pasuk in Yeshayahu, that Mashiach in the future is going to smell us. The Gemara says it. The Mashiach's not going to look, he's not going to touch, he's not going to taste, he's going to smell us. He's going to smell a Jew. He's going to be able to find all the Jews and all the good people and smell them. Because that sense of smell, something pervades in a person as a Jew, that he smells good. And before we get to the real takeaway, there's a story of the Tolner Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan Tursky. He was a Rebbe in Yerushalayim. He was nifter, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. He passed away. He used to host a lot of people in Yerushalayim. People used to come to him all the time. So it was one Pesach, one Seder night. They had a number of people, and he had a person who, was a little bit, what might we say, a vagabond, right? That's the right word, maybe homeless. And he invited him in, and he was sitting at the table, and this guest was seated near the children. And the Tolner Rebbe could see the children were slowly inching away from this man. And it seemed like something was bothering them. They were inching away and not wanting the guest to be embarrassed. So he said, "Oh my gosh, how can I not eat or sit our important guest next to me?" So he had the guest move away from the children, put him next to him, and he saved him from any embarrassment that might have happened. So a few days, or the next day, 2 days later on Chol HaMoed, so the Tolner Rebbe called in the children to the room and he said, "Boys, don't you realize you could have embarrassed this man? What were you doing? How could you inch away from another Jew like that?" And they turned to the Rebbe and they said, "He smelled bad. He hadn't washed in days. It was unbearably smelly. We couldn't sit next to him." And the Tolner Rebbe said, "Absolutely not." And you'll excuse any Yiddish speakers here if I mess this one up. But he turns to the children and he said, "A Yid schmeckt gut." That's right. A Jew smells good. A Jew always smells good. That's what he told the children. So I think the message of this is very similar. See, we can imagine that we're surrounded by so much filth, so many things in life that are not where we want to be. And we're in a world that is pretty dirty and there's a lot of garbage floating around there. But I think the message is to realize that there's a part of us that is undiluted, completely holy, that's untouched by anything that this world can surround us with, even things that we do to ourselves. There's a part of us that's untouchable. And that is signified and hinted to by that sense of smell, that holiest of senses, that was never ruined by that first sin in the garden. And the whole goal is to be able to get eventually, Emir Hashem, to be able to get back to the garden, right? Okay, Gan Eden, whatever that is, that's not, not the point. But the goal is to be able to get to this place in life where a person realizes how beautiful we are, and that Hashem turns to each and every single one of us, and Mashiach is going to turn to each and every single one of us. It's going to say, a Yid shmek good, a Jew smells good. And they're going to be able to smell that part of us that we ourselves can't sometimes smell, that we ourselves can't sometimes see. And so I think that that's the goal. The goal is to be able to come to Purim and to be able to throw off all these other knowledges, all these other opinions we have of ourselves, right? The snake says, guess what? You can be in control. You can have opinions. You can control your destiny. And we turn back to the snake and say, no, Hashem is in control. And you know what's so beautiful about that? Because I don't see the beauty in life sometimes, and I don't see the beauty in myself sometimes, and I don't see all these little beautiful aspects, but Hashem does, and he's the one in control. And so I think that that's the idea of Purim. Purim, like Yom Kippur, when we offer up that incense, trying to gain atonement for all those small little things in life, be able to look at ourselves, be able to look at other Jews around us, just like Mashiach's going to do, be able to look at another Jew and say, you smell good. I see beautiful things in you. And to be able to say to ourselves, ultimately Hashem's in control, and Hashem smells every single one of us and finds that good point in each and every single one of us. So I think that's just a nice message to be able to take home. And again, these are hints and beautiful things to just take. Some are examples, some are meant to be taken literally, some are not, but ultimately the message, I think, rings true. Okay, Shkoyach, thank you everybody for attending, for coming, and stay back. Any comments, any questions?
Thank you very much.